Welcome to Slumbertainment. Get comfortable, close your eyes, and let yourself relax. Tonight we explore the history of clothing. Please like and subscribe for more restful content. Now, let's begin. Long before recorded history, the earliest humans faced the primal challenge of surviving the world's elements. Clothing began not as expression or craft, but as necessity, a second skin fashioned from what nature provided. Archaeological evidence suggests that the first coverings appeared tens of thousands of years ago, likely during the late Paleolithic era, when climates grew colder and migrations pushed humans into less forgiving environments. Animal hides, stripped, dried, and softened with stones, became the earliest forms of protection. These simple wrappings were the difference between life and frostbite, shelter and exposure. The first threads of clothing were not woven, but tied. Sinew or twisted plant fibers binding furs and skins to the body, creating crude tunics and coverings that marked a turning point in human adaptation. Over generations, the instinct to survive evolved into curiosity and refinement. People learned that certain plants yielded fibers that could be twisted into longer, stronger cords. Flax, nettle, and wild grasses were among the earliest to be transformed this way, leading to what would become the foundation of textile technology. The act of spinning, twisting fibers to create continuous strands, began as a manual process, performed by rolling fibers along the thigh. Over time, simple tools like the spindle and whirl emerged. These innovations amplified what the human hand could do, creating threads fine enough to weave. Though the materials were perishable, impressions of woven patterns found on ancient pottery tell us that weaving predated the written word. Each strand was a record of observation and patience, linking human ingenuity with the natural world. Weaving itself likely developed from basket making. Early humans, already skilled at interlacing reeds and grasses, applied similar logic to finer materials. The earliest looms were little more than sticks in the ground, but they represented a new kind of technology, one of repetition and rhythm. Warp threads stretched tight, weft threads passed over and under, a pattern that would remain unchanged for millennia. The first woven fabrics were uneven and coarse, but they marked the birth of a craft that intertwined physics with art. To weave was to control tension, to balance pull and slack, to understand how matter behaved under the guidance of the mind. Animal fibers soon joined the plant ones. Sheep once hunted were eventually domesticated for wool. The process of carding, spinning and weaving wool brought warmth and resilience unmatched by plant fibers. In parallel, goats and camels provided hair that could be spun into yarn, while the silkworm, cultivated first in ancient China, added a new dimension of luxury and mystique. The Silk Road, thousands of years later, would carry that fragile thread across continents, shaping economies and empires. But in these earliest times, every thread was local, every garment a product of human hands and nearby landscape. To clothe oneself was to live within the cycle of nature, to hunt, to gather, to twist, and to weave the world into something wearable. Clothing also began to carry meaning beyond survival. Decorated hides, coloured fibres, and deliberate stitching suggest that early humans used their garments to signal identity, status, or belonging. Ochre pigments were rubbed into skins to add colour. Shells and bones were sewn as adornments. These simple acts of decoration were the first gestures toward fashion, not in the modern sense of trend, but in the timeless sense of expression. The line between protection and presentation blurred. What began as shield against the cold became a language of its own, a silent vocabulary made of texture and form. From these early beginnings, the story of clothing expanded alongside the story of humanity. As people settled, invented tools, and formed societies, their clothing evolved with them. Each innovation, the needle, the loom, the spindle, was a quiet revolution, enabling not only comfort but communication. The earliest garments were not made in workshops or factories, but around fires, by families and communities who passed knowledge hand to hand. In this way, the making of clothes was also the making of culture, binding generations through shared practice. Every stitch, every woven thread, carried with it a record of adaptation, a reflection of the human drive to shape the environment into something meaningful. Even in these primitive forms, the science of clothing had begun. The physical principles of tension, friction, and twist governed the craft. The chemistry of fibers, cellulose in plants, protein in animal hair, determined texture and strength. Without formal understanding, early makers observed these truths through touch and experience, discovering that heat could soften hides, that soaking could loosen fibers, that drying in the sun could preserve and harden. Their knowledge was empirical, drawn from countless repetitions and quiet experiments conducted over centuries. In every sense, clothing was an applied science, one that required no written formula, only attention and time. As the Ice Age waned and climates grew milder, the role of clothing shifted once again. No longer only a means of survival, it became an element of human identity and progress. Communities distinguished themselves by how they dressed, what materials they used, and how they adorned them. The first regional styles emerged, a hint of what would later become the complex systems of textile production and fashion that defined civilizations. Yet beneath the surface, the purpose remained steady: to understand and control the materials of the earth in service of human need. The making of clothing was one of the earliest demonstrations of intelligence made visible, proof that humans were not only shaped by their environment, but could shape it in return. This first chapter, then, is the story of discovery, the long process by which humans learned to wrap themselves in the world, transforming raw matter into something both functional and expressive. It is the prelude to every thread that followed, from the homespun tunics of early farmers to the silks of emperors and the cottons of industrial looms. The thread that runs through history began here, twisted between fingers, spun by instinct and woven into the human story itself. When humans began to settle and cultivate the land, clothing changed from a tool of survival to a craft of design and structure. Permanent dwellings allowed for storage of fibers, looms, and tools, giving rise to early textile industries within small communities. The Neolithic period marked a quiet transformation, from nomadic skins to woven cloth. Evidence from archaeological sites in Mesopotamia, Egypt, and the Indus Valley shows that by 6000 BCE, weaving had become both a domestic art and a social necessity. The loom, at first simple, became the centerpiece of this era, a device that turned raw material into fabric through human rhythm and pattern. The vertical warp-weighted loom was among the first significant technological leaps. Weighted stones kept warp threads taut, while the weaver passed the weft through them, line by line. This innovation allowed larger fabrics to be produced, transforming how garments could be shaped and joined. Over time, variations appeared: horizontal ground looms in Egypt, backstrap looms in Mesoamerica, and frame looms in the Mediterranean. Each culture refined the mechanics according to its needs, materials, and spatial constraints. What united them was the same fundamental act: the controlled interlacing of threads, a physical manifestation of order and precision. To weave was to impose geometry on chaos. The materials themselves mirrored the landscapes they came from. In the river valleys of Egypt, flax thrived, giving birth to linen, smooth, breathable, and resilient against heat. Linen production required meticulous preparation. The stalks soaked in water until fibres loosened, then beaten, combed, and spun. In the Fertile Crescent, wool remained dominant, offering warmth and elasticity. In the Indus Valley, early forms of cotton appeared, the seeds separated from their fibres through primitive ginning methods. Each fibre had its own science. The molecular structure of cellulose in plants versus keratin in animal hair determined how each responded to twist, tension, and dye. Without chemistry as a discipline, ancient weavers practiced it intuitively. Textiles quickly became more than utilitarian. They served as currency, tribute, and status symbols. In Egypt, linen wrappings for mummies were woven with a precision that bordered on spiritual devotion. Each thread counted, each layer representing care and continuity. In Mesopotamia, records inscribed on clay tablets mention rations of wool for temple workers and specialized weavers employed by royal households. Cloth became an early form of accounting and trade, its value determined by texture and fineness. The ability to produce cloth not only clothed a community, but defined its economy. Patterns emerged alongside technique. Stripes, checks, and intricate borders appeared in early textiles, the result of experimenting with coloured threads and variable weft spacing. Dyes derived from minerals, plants, and insects introduced colour: blue from indigo, red from madder root, yellow from saffron and turmeric. The chemical reactions were complex but observed empirically. Heat fixed colour, sunlight faded it, and certain mordants like alum improved stability. These discoveries represented early material science at work. Each piece of cloth was both art and experiment, the product of observation and repetition refined through centuries of practice. The loom, as simple as it appeared, contained the seeds of future machinery. The principles of tension, leverage, and alternating motion formed a mechanical logic that would echo across millennia. Each thread crossing another represented a binary choice, over or under, a primitive logic that anticipated the patterns of coded systems to come. In ancient societies, this rhythm of weaving carried spiritual associations as well. The Greeks imagined the fates weaving human destinies, and many cultures linked textile creation with divine figures. The process of weaving was thus both mechanical and mythological, a balance of precision and creation that reflected humanity's growing control over matter. Across continents, these developments advanced independently, yet in parallel. In China, silk weaving became a guarded art, its process a secret so valuable that revealing it was punishable by death. Silk's microscopic smoothness gave it unmatched luster, and its production, from nurturing silkworms to reeling filaments, demanded discipline and delicacy. The Silk Road that later linked East and West carried more than goods. It carried techniques and ideas, spreading the science of textiles across empires. Cotton cultivation, meanwhile, expanded through India and Africa, its versatility making it a global staple long before industrialization. Each fibre found its ecosystem, and each ecosystem shaped its civilization's clothing. The social structure of weaving was deeply gendered in most early societies. Women dominated textile production, passing techniques orally and through apprenticeship. Weaving circles became spaces of community, continuity, and knowledge transfer. The rhythmic sound of loom weights and shuttles marked time in households across the ancient world. Though rarely recorded by historians, this labour sustained economies and equipped armies, temples, and households alike. Every empire depended on its weavers as much as its farmers and builders, though their names have largely been lost to time. As urban centres grew, specialisation deepened. Weavers became artisans, dyers formed guilds, and traders moved textiles across continents. The first global commodities were fabrics, lightweight, durable, and valuable. A single bolt of fine linen or silk could represent months of labour and serve as tribute or dowry. Textiles moved wealth more efficiently than metals or stone, carrying aesthetic and symbolic value that outlasted many empires. The loom, simple in form, became one of humanity's most influential machines, a device that turned motion into matter, rhythm into utility. By the end of the Neolithic period, clothing had evolved into both art and infrastructure. It reflected local resources, yet hinted at global connection. Every thread represented observation, every fabric a record of cooperation between human thought and natural law. The age of weaving, spanning thousands of years, laid the foundation for all later innovation. It showed that progress need not be loud or sudden. It could unfold through steady repetition, the patient interlacing of fibres, the quiet pursuit of perfection through pattern. The science of clothing was no longer only survival. It had become systematic, deliberate, and generational. From the hum of the spindle to the whisper of thread through loom, the story of human clothing had entered its first true age of technology, one woven from patience, geometry, and human will. By the dawn of recorded history, textiles had become integral to civilization itself. The rise of cities brought organized production, trade, and regulation of cloth. Each element of society intertwined with the threads of fabric it produced. Clothing was now both symbol and structure, defining rank, profession, and culture. Archaeological records from Sumer, Egypt, and the Indus Valley reveal weaving districts, dye workshops, and storerooms filled with bolts of fabric. The loom, once a household tool, evolved into an instrument of industry. The making of cloth had become an economic force. In Mesopotamia, the temple complexes of Ur and Babylon housed vast weaving operations staffed by specialized workers. Clay tablets recorded rations of grain and oil distributed to weavers, spinners, and dyers. Early documentation of textile management. Linen and wool were principal materials, traded across the Tigris and Euphrates through a network that reached Anatolia and the Persian Gulf. Textiles became standardized commodities, with weight, size, and thread count influencing value. This was the beginning of textile economics, a system that measured human effort in units of thread. In Egypt, clothing expressed hierarchy as much as craftsmanship. The quality of linen signified status, its fineness measured by the density of its weave. Royal garments were transparent, smooth, and meticulously pleated, demonstrating mastery over the fiber's natural stiffness. Workshops near temples and palaces operated under strict supervision, producing clothing for priests and pharaohs as offerings to gods as much as to people. Each garment carried not only labour, but ritual significance. The wrapping of mummies in layers of linen preserved not only the body, but the memory of craftsmanship, a textile extending into eternity. In the Indus Valley, excavations at Mohenjo-Daro and Harappa suggest a society rich in cotton production. Fragments of spun thread and impressions of woven cloth show technical skill and organised manufacturing. Cotton's softness and absorbency suited the region's climate, and its cultivation would later shape global trade routes. The spinning wheel, though appearing later in India's history, had its conceptual origins in these early practices of continuous fibre manipulation. The science of tension and torque, fundamental to all later machinery, was first learned through spinning. Across China, the cultivation of silk elevated textile production to both science and art. The process required precise environmental control, mulberry trees for silkworms, careful harvesting of cocoons, and delicate reeling of filament. The resulting fibre, a continuous strand of protein, possessed tensile strength greater than steel of equal diameter. Early Chinese records describe silk's shimmering quality as a metaphor for harmony between heaven and earth. By 3000 BCE, silk garments were reserved for nobility, and the secret of sericulture became a state-protected technology. Its refinement demonstrated that the making of clothing had become both material science and social structure. Textiles also served as carriers of information. Before widespread writing, patterns and colours functioned as identifiers, a visual language of origin, belief, and status. In Mesopotamia, fringed shawls distinguished social ranks. In Egypt, pleating and dye denoted ceremonial purpose. The earliest trade routes transmitted not only goods, but aesthetics and techniques. Indigo from India reached the Near East. Tin and copper followed the same paths, linking textile production to metallurgy and other crafts. Each civilization adapted foreign methods to its environment, creating unique hybrid styles that reflected both connection and independence. The tools of the trade improved steadily. Bronze and copper needles replaced bone, allowing finer stitching. Spindles became balanced and efficient, capable of producing thinner threads. Looms gained more control through heddles and tensioning systems, enabling complex patterns. Each advance multiplied output and refined quality, transforming textiles from necessities into symbols of prosperity. The mathematics of weaving, counting threads, calculating proportions, maintaining alignment, trained minds in precision and foresight. Long before formal education, the loom was a silent teacher of logic. Textile work also shaped human perception of time. Weaving required patience, repetition, and rhythm. Each pass of the shuttle marked a moment. Each row of threads accumulated like seasons. Ancient weavers often described their craft in terms of cycles, echoing the movement of the sun and moon. The predictability of pattern paralleled agricultural and cosmic order. In this way, clothing became a metaphor for continuity, a tangible reminder that progress was woven, not forged. Clothing's role in religion and ritual deepened this symbolism. Priestly garments in Sumer were dyed and embroidered to signify divine service. In Egypt, white linen symbolized purity. In China, silk robes represented cosmic balance, their colors tied to elements and directions. To wear certain fabrics was to embody cultural values. To weave them was to participate in the creation of meaning. The science of clothing was inseparable from the metaphysics of civilization, a link between physical skill and spiritual intent. Trade expanded the influence of textiles beyond local boundaries. By 2000 BCE, networks spanned from Egypt through Mesopotamia to the Indus Valley, exchanging fibres, dyes and designs. Cloth became the earliest form of global communication, a soft medium that carried the signature of each region's climate and craft. A linen bolt from Egypt, a silk thread from China, or a dyed cotton from India, each told a story of chemistry, geography, and human adaptation. The paths they travelled would later become the arteries of global commerce. As civilizations advanced, the management of textile production grew more complex. Records mention overseers, quotas, and quality inspectors. The science of measurement, of thread count, tension, and consistency began to emerge. Dyers observed that certain mordants fixed colour permanently, while others faded. Spinners learned to balance twist against thickness for strength. These empirical discoveries, repeated across centuries, laid the groundwork for modern material science. The loom was an early laboratory, and the fabric it produced was both experiment and result. By the end of the Bronze Age, textiles had achieved a level of sophistication that rivaled metallurgy and architecture. Clothing no longer merely reflected environment, but defined civilization. The craft united physics, chemistry, and art under a single purpose: to turn matter into meaning. Each society, from the floodplains of Egypt to the valleys of China, expressed itself through the structure of its fabric and the pattern of its weave. The history of clothing had become the history of civilization itself, measured not in monuments of stone, but in threads that endured the passage of time. As city-states expanded into empires, textiles became a cornerstone of power, trade, and cultural identity. The movement of cloth across regions mirrored the movement of ideas, armies, and belief systems. Between 1500 BCE and 500 BCE, the great civilizations of Egypt, Mesopotamia, India, China, Greece, and the Mediterranean wove their own traditions into a global network of textile knowledge. Every fibre, cotton, flax, wool, silk, became part of a material dialogue that linked continents long before maps were drawn. The story of clothing entered an imperial age, where threads carried the weight of nations. In Egypt's New Kingdom, linen production reached industrial scale. Tomb paintings depict rows of women spinning, weaving, and folding bolts of cloth destined for temple offerings or export. Linen garments became a measure of wealth, and even in death, pharaohs demanded vast quantities for burial. Linen functioned as currency, tribute, and tax payment, its purity equated with divine order. The precision of Egyptian textiles, some with more than 200 threads per inch, testified to technical mastery unmatched for centuries. Their weaving methods influenced Mediterranean societies, where linen production became a sign of cultural refinement. To the east, in Mesopotamia and Persia, wool replaced linen as the fabric of empire. The Achaemenid Persians organized textile production on a massive scale, employing artisans across provinces. Dyeing reached new sophistication. Purple and crimson, extracted from murex shells and cochineal insects, symbolized imperial authority. Persian workshops introduced brocade and patterned weaves, layering texture into design. The resulting fabrics, thick, colourful and durable, spread through conquest and trade, wrapping rulers and courtiers alike in material expressions of hierarchy. To wear certain textiles was to declare allegiance. To weave them was to serve empire. India, meanwhile, refined cotton into its highest form. By 1000 BCE, Indian spinners were producing thread so fine that Greek historians later described it as woven air. Techniques of ginning, carding, and spinning were perfected, and early forms of resist dyeing and block printing emerged. These processes combined chemistry with artistry, mordants to fix colour, wax or clay to resist dye penetration. The resulting textiles were not only practical, but visually intricate. Indian cottons, light and washable, became prized exports across Asia and the Middle East. The subcontinent's mastery of fibre manipulation laid the foundation for the global cotton trade that would dominate future centuries. In China, silk remained the empire's secret weapon of commerce and diplomacy. By the Zhou dynasty, weaving had advanced beyond plain fabric into complex damasks and gauzes. The invention of the drawloom allowed weavers to control individual warp threads, creating patterns through mathematical precision. Silk garments symbolized rank and ritual, with colour and weave regulated by law. The scientific understanding required to produce silk, managing temperature, humidity, and filament, made it an early form of biotechnology. Silk became China's most guarded innovation. It spread westward, setting in motion the vast exchange route later known as the Silk Road. Greece and Rome absorbed and transformed these influences. Greek women wove linen chitons and woolen cloaks, their patterns simple yet mathematically balanced. The loom was both a domestic and symbolic instrument associated with Athena, goddess of wisdom and craft. In Rome, textile production became institutional. Vast workshops, or gynaecia, supplied the legions and the populace. Wool remained central, but silk and linen imports from the East grew increasingly desirable. The Roman elite draped themselves in fabrics that traced roots from India, Persia, and China, illustrating the empire's global reach. Textiles had become both luxury and logistics, proof that empire ran on threads as much as on soldiers. Trade routes expanded, linking distant regions through textiles. Caravans carried silk westward through Central Asia. Ships transported linen and cotton across the Red Sea. The dye trade connected Phoenician cities to African and Asian suppliers. Textile merchants became some of the earliest long-distance traders, bridging languages through the universal value of fabric. Inscriptions and records describe weights, prices, and contracts, indicating that textiles often served as standard measures of wealth. Fabric was portable, divisible, and durable, the perfect economic medium in a world before coinage became widespread. The techniques of spinning and weaving continued to evolve. The drop spindle became more refined, its whirl balanced for continuous rotation. Looms incorporated treadles, freeing the hands to guide shuttles. Dyeworks experimented with layered mordants to produce richer hues. These were incremental innovations, yet their cumulative effect reshaped industries. The study of fibre properties, how moisture affected tension, how twist influenced strength, represented a growing empirical understanding of materials. Without formal laboratories, ancient artisans performed controlled experiments with every batch of cloth they produced. Textiles also carried ideology. In many cultures, clothing expressed moral and social codes. The Greeks associated plain, undyed garments with virtue. Persians favoured elaborate patterning as a sign of order and civilization. In China, silk colour denoted one's place in cosmic hierarchy. Clothing laws, sumptuary regulations, emerged to control who could wear certain fabrics or colours. These laws reflected both resource management and social engineering. By restricting access to luxury textiles, rulers reinforced political structure. The science of clothing had thus become intertwined with the science of governance. The exchange of textile knowledge shaped technology far beyond clothing. The logic of the loom, warp and weft, fixed and moving elements, influenced architectural design and later mechanical thinking. Early philosophers compared the cosmos to a woven fabric, structured yet fluid. This metaphor endured through centuries, describing both the physical and the abstract. Threads became symbols of fate, continuity, and connection. The mechanical precision of weaving reflected humanity's desire to impose order upon nature, a theme that would recur in every technological revolution to come. By the end of the classical era, the world was connected by cloth. From Egyptian linen to Indian cotton, from Persian wool to Chinese silk, textiles bound continents through shared need and curiosity. They represented the convergence of art and science, of economy and belief. The making of clothing had become a universal human endeavour, one that wove empires together even as it distinguished their identities. The loom stood as both a tool and a metaphor, a quiet engine of civilization, turning the chaos of raw matter into the patterned order of culture. When the ancient empires faded, their threads did not break. They wove themselves into the fabric of medieval life, forming new patterns across Europe, Asia, and the Islamic world. From roughly 500 to 1500 CE, textile production became one of humanity's most enduring crafts, a bridge between the ancient and the modern, between household labour and organised industry. The loom remained the beating heart of material culture, its steady rhythm echoing through monasteries, workshops, and village homes alike. After the fall of Rome, Europe's textile traditions fragmented and localised. Linen and wool dominated, their production embedded in rural life. Every household spun and wove to supply its own needs. The spinning wheel, which arrived from India through the Islamic world by the 13th century, transformed this slow domestic rhythm. Its rotating wheel replaced the drop spindle, allowing continuous thread production with one hand guiding and the other powering. This single device increased output dramatically, signalling the first mechanical step toward industrial weaving. It was simple, yet profound. The principle of stored rotational energy harnessed for fibre creation. Wool became the foundation of European economy. Flocks grazed across England, Flanders, and Spain, their fleece forming the basis of trade and taxation. Monasteries perfected the art of fulling, washing and beating woven cloth to shrink and thicken it, while guilds regulated quality and price. The town of Ghent in modern Belgium emerged as a centre of fine woolen cloth, exporting to Italy and beyond. English wool, prized for its softness, became a diplomatic currency. Cloth was no longer just clothing, it was capital, taxed, traded, and used to pay armies. The science of clothing had become inseparable from political economy. In parallel, silk production spread westward from Byzantium. Around the 6th century, according to Byzantine chronicles, monks smuggled silkworm eggs and mulberry seeds from China concealed in hollow staffs. With this act, one of history's most closely guarded secrets escaped its origin. Constantinople soon developed thriving silk workshops, producing robes for emperors and clergy. Byzantine artisans wove complex patterned silks using draw looms capable of producing repeating motifs: lions, eagles, vines and crosses, symbols that blended imperial power with Christian iconography. Silk garments adorned altars and royalty alike, connecting divine imagery with material precision. The Islamic world carried the science of textiles to new heights. Between the 8th and 13th centuries, cities such as Damascus, Baghdad, and Cairo became renowned for fabrics of extraordinary quality. Muslim scholars advanced dye chemistry, introducing mordants like alum and refining indigo and madder extraction. They catalogued fibres and described techniques with scientific precision in Arabic treatises that would later inform European alchemy and chemistry. Textiles were traded along caravan routes linking Africa, Persia, and Spain, making cloth one of the most universal symbols of Islamic cultural and economic strength. The word Muslim, derived from Mosul, and Damask from Damascus, still bear the trace of this heritage. Meanwhile, China maintained its supremacy in silk, combining artistic refinement with industrial efficiency. The Song dynasty introduced mechanized draw looms with foot treadles, freeing hands for greater control. Weavers recorded patterns using early forms of notation, anticipating binary logic centuries before digital computation. The organization of labor mirrored a proto-industrial system: specialized workshops, quality oversight, and regional distribution. Textile production was not only economic but philosophical, a reflection of Confucian order, where harmony arose from disciplined structure. Every weave was a study in balance between human motion and natural law. In Europe, by the High Middle Ages, textile centres emerged in Italy, notably Florence, Lucca, and Venice, where silk and velvet weaving flourished. These cities imported raw silk from the East and employed thousands of artisans in guild-controlled workshops. Innovations such as compound looms and new dye recipes gave rise to fabrics of unmatched richness. Gold and silver threads were woven into brocades, producing shimmering garments for nobility and clergy. These textiles became instruments of visual language, power rendered in colour and texture. The manipulation of light through fibre was both science and spectacle. Clothing mirrored social structure. Laws dictated what one could wear according to rank and income. Sumptuary codes restricted commoners from wearing silk or bright dyes. The colours of clothing became visual shorthand for hierarchy: purple for royalty, deep red for nobility, unbleached wool for peasants. These laws were not only moral statements but economic strategies, designed to control imports, preserve local industry, and manage scarce resources. Textiles were both visible order and hidden infrastructure, governing daily life through thread. The medieval loom itself evolved slowly but meaningfully. The horizontal treadle loom spread through Europe in the 11th and 12th centuries, doubling production speed. By allowing foot pedals to lift warp threads, it freed both hands to guide the shuttle with precision. The structure of the loom reflected principles of mechanics: leverage, torque, and alternating motion. In studying looms, later engineers found inspiration for machines of entirely different purposes. The logic of movement, converting human energy into patterned motion, became a recurring model for invention. Beyond Europe, textile innovation thrived across continents. In West Africa, the art of strip weaving produced narrow bands of cloth, later sewn together into wide garments, a technique still used in kente and aso oke fabrics. In the Americas, Andean cultures wove alpaca and vicuna fibers into complex geometric designs with symbolic meaning. These textiles represented sophisticated understanding of colour theory and symmetry, achieved without written language or external influence. Each region discovered its own equilibrium between function and beauty, proving that the science of clothing was universal and adaptive. By the late medieval period, textiles had become Europe's largest industry and a primary driver of urban growth. Merchant guilds governed trade. Dyers, fullers, and weavers formed specialised castes. Towns identified themselves by their cloth: Florence for silk, Ghent for wool, Venice for velvet. The organisation of labour, the control of quality, and the balance between craft and commerce all foreshadowed the industrial systems to come. Yet the heart of the process remained unchanged: the transformation of loose fibre into structured fabric through the patient rhythm of the loom. As the Middle Ages drew to a close, a quiet revolution was underway. The loom, perfected through centuries of incremental refinement, had become both symbol and engine of human ingenuity. Its structure embodied order. Its motion mirrored life. In every monastery, workshop and marketplace, the sound of weaving marked the passage of time, a mechanical heartbeat of civilization, steady and enduring. The medieval world had spun its legacy into thread, setting the stage for the machines that would soon reshape it entirely. The Renaissance transformed Europe's understanding of the material world, and clothing was part of that awakening. From the 14th to the 17th century, textiles became an expression of human creativity as much as technical mastery. Art, science, and commerce converged in fabric. The loom, once confined to household or guild workshop, now served the ambitions of merchants, scholars, and monarchs. clothing was no longer only protection or hierarchy, it became an instrument of self-definition, a new language for a new age. Italy stood at the centre of this transformation. Florence, Lucca, and Venice were hubs of silk production, their workshops filled with skilled weavers operating complex draw looms. Italian silks rivaled those of Byzantium and surpassed them in design. Brocade and velvet production demanded mathematical precision and artistic imagination, controlling tension, thread density, and warp colour to create patterns that caught light in layers. Artisans recorded designs in grid-like templates, foreshadowing mechanical programming. The beauty of these textiles was not only visual but structural, born from geometry and discipline. Weaving became an intersection of art and physics. The manipulation of light through surface texture, matte and gloss, pile and plain weave, was studied with the same attention that painters gave to perspective. Fabric responded to movement, reflecting and absorbing light differently depending on thread orientation. This understanding of optics and texture made clothing a kinetic art form. A velvet robe shimmered differently with every gesture, merging craft and science in a visible experiment of perception. As textile production expanded, trade routes deepened. Italian merchants brought silk from the Levant and cotton from India through Ottoman intermediaries. The Mediterranean became a circulatory system of material exchange. Dyeing too grew more sophisticated. Indigo, cochineal and madder were refined into standardized recipes, their effects documented with near-scientific precision. Workshops guarded these formulas as proprietary secrets, controlling not only hue but permanence. The ability to fix colour permanently marked a step toward modern chemistry. Alchemists and dyers shared a language of transformation: heat, solution, reaction, though one sought gold and the other crimson. In northern Europe, the wool trade dominated. The Flemish cities of Bruges, Ghent and Ypres produced fine cloth exported across the continent. England supplied the raw fleece, feeding an economy that tied rural pastures to urban looms. The finishing process, shearing, fulling and pressing, became increasingly specialised. Cloth quality depended on controlled moisture, temperature and pressure. The refinement of fulling mills, powered by water, mechanised part of textile finishing centuries before the Industrial Revolution. Each turn of the mill's wooden hammers represented a merger of craft with engineering. Textiles influenced painting and portraiture. Artists such as Jan van Eyck and Leonardo da Vinci studied fabric folds as exercises in light and texture. Their depictions of silk, linen and velvet were not mere decoration but precise optical studies. The rendering of cloth required understanding the same material laws that governed weaving: reflection, absorption, and tension. Through their eyes, fabric became a scientific subject, proof of how matter could mimic life. Painters, dyers, and weavers each explored the physics of appearance, different crafts united by observation. The concept of fashion, change for its own sake, emerged during this period. In courts from Florence to Paris, the pace of style accelerated. Clothing began to follow cycles of novelty, a social mechanism that encouraged production and trade. Tailors experimented with structure and volume, manipulating textiles through cutting and stitching rather than just weaving. The science of pattern making evolved. Garments were no longer draped from single pieces, but assembled from shaped sections. Geometry, measurement, and proportion became essential. The tailor's chalk line was as precise as an architect's drawing, translating mathematics into motion. Sumptuary laws multiplied, reflecting both moral anxiety and economic control. Governments feared that visible wealth might blur class distinctions or drain treasuries through luxury imports. In response, laws specified who could wear certain fabrics or colours. Only the nobility could use gold thread or foreign silks. Yet enforcement proved difficult. Merchants, newly wealthy, defied old boundaries, and clothing became a silent rebellion, a declaration that social order could be redrawn with needle and thread. The textile trade thus became both economic force and social catalyst. Beyond Europe, the global textile map expanded dramatically. The Ottoman Empire controlled the crossroads of fibre routes between East and West. Persian brocades and Indian muslins reached Mediterranean ports, their production supported by systems of irrigation, spinning, and dyeing perfected over centuries. In India, artisans produced cottons so fine that a bolt of fabric could pass through a ring. Patterns were printed or painted with natural dyes, fixed through heat and time. These textiles would later become the envy of Europe and a driving factor in colonial trade. The precision with which colour bonded to cotton fibre reflected a deep understanding of molecular interaction, practical chemistry long before the term existed. In China, silk production remained unmatched. The Ming dynasty standardized sericulture, codifying feeding schedules for silkworms and optimizing temperature for cocooning. Silk's molecular uniformity allowed it to absorb dye evenly, producing brilliant tones. Chinese silk weavers perfected complex damasks and double-faced fabrics that could display different patterns on each side, an achievement requiring absolute control of thread tension and warp selection. Such textiles were both art and data, physical manifestations of controlled variables and predictable results. Renaissance exploration expanded textile horizons even further. New World discoveries introduced dyestuffs such as cochineal, extracted from insects on cactus plants in Central America, producing reds brighter and more stable than any known before. This pigment transformed the global dye economy. Spain guarded its source as jealously as China had guarded silk. The value of colour became geopolitical. Empires competed not just for territory, but for tone. By the 16th century, textile workshops had become laboratories of mechanical logic. Draw looms with multiple assistants operated as coordinated systems, each person responsible for a section of motion. The division of labour mirrored the structure of early industry. Fabric was both art and algorithm, a coded system of interlaced variables governed by repetition and symmetry. To weave was to calculate. Each pattern required numerical precision, each thread a controlled element in a structured design. The Renaissance thus redefined the science and history of clothing. It merged empirical observation with aesthetic ambition. Every fabric represented a synthesis of physics, chemistry, geometry, and art. The weaver, the dyer, the tailor, and the merchant each contributed to an ecosystem of knowledge that linked workshop to world. The loom remained central, no longer a humble household tool, but a mechanical instrument of intellect and expression. In its steady rhythm lay the sound of a civilization learning to measure beauty as carefully as it measured cloth. The 17th and 18th centuries marked the convergence of trade, technology, and empire. Textiles lay at the centre of this transformation, serving as currency, political leverage, and scientific experiment. The modern world took shape along the threads that crossed oceans and continents. As European powers expanded outward, cloth became both instrument and symbol of control. Every yard of fabric represented not only labour, but territory, not only craftsmanship, but colonization. Cotton reshaped the global economy. Though cultivated for millennia in India, it reached Europe in scale only through the trade networks of the East India companies. Indian cottons, soft, colourful and easily washable, captivated European markets. Calicos and chintzes, printed with floral designs using carved wooden blocks, became prized commodities. Their brightness outlasted European dyes. Their smooth texture defied local imitations. Indian dyers had mastered mordants and resist dyeing techniques that fused pigment to fibre at the molecular level. European chemists, unable to replicate these results, began systematic experimentation, marking the early stirrings of industrial chemistry. The influx of cotton threatened established wool and linen industries. Governments responded with prohibitions. England's Calico Acts of the early 1700s banned imported cotton prints to protect domestic producers. Yet demand persisted, driving innovation rather than suppression. British merchants and inventors sought ways to reproduce Indian methods through machinery. The need to mimic hand-printed cotton spurred the mechanization of spinning and weaving, the prelude to industrial revolution. Thus, global exchange set in motion technological acceleration. Meanwhile, silk continued its journey westward. French weavers in Lyon perfected patterned silks for the royal court. Their looms incorporated complex draw mechanisms, each requiring teams of operators, one to raise warp threads, another to guide the shuttle. The designs were drafted on squared paper, an abstract notation of mechanical movement. This translation from image to motion laid the conceptual groundwork for programmable machines. In every pattern there was logic, a sequence of binary decisions, over or under, raised or lowered. The language of weaving quietly anticipated that of computation. Across Europe, textile guilds guarded their secrets, while monarchs encouraged invention. The Dutch refined linen bleaching, using controlled sunlight and alkaline baths. The French developed new mordants that increased colour fastness. English engineers improved spinning wheels, adding multiple spindles for efficiency. Each refinement, though small, multiplied production. The loom and spindle evolved from household tools to engines of commerce. The balance between hand and machine shifted, not abruptly but inevitably, driven by scale. Empires relied on textiles as instruments of trade. Ships of the British, Dutch and Portuguese East India Companies carried cloth to Africa, where it served as currency in the slave trade, and to Asia, where it bought spices and porcelain. Fabric moved across oceans more efficiently than coins. Its portability and demand made it ideal for negotiation and exchange. Textiles were global language, a medium of trade that required no translation. Yet behind its beauty lay systems of coercion. Cotton cultivation in colonies relied on labour exploitation. Dye plants were grown in controlled monopolies. The scientific study of fibre was inseparable from imperial management. In India, local weavers faced both admiration and destruction. European merchants initially depended on Indian expertise, but later imposed systems that undermined it. The British East India Company dictated prices and output, turning artisans into wage labourers. By the late 18th century, Britain's mechanised mills began to outproduce Indian workshops. The global balance reversed. Once the world's textile master, India became a market for imported British cloth. The loom that had symbolised creativity became a tool of subjugation. Industrial science, while advancing precision, also redrew power. At the same time, textile manufacture advanced through a series of inventions that redefined production speed. The flying shuttle, invented by John Kay in 1733, allowed a single weaver to operate a wide loom, doubling efficiency. The spinning jenny, James Hargreaves, 1764, multiplied thread output. The water frame, Richard Arkwright, 1769, used water power for continuous spinning, and the mule, Samuel Crompton, 1779, combined the strengths of both, producing fine, strong yarn suitable for cotton. These inventions formed a system, input, energy, output, that defined industrial mechanics. Each machine replicated human gestures with mechanical endurance. The scientific principles underlying these machines were simple yet profound. The conversion of rotational to reciprocal motion, the control of tension across variable fibre diameters, and the synchronization of moving parts all derived from empirical observation of weaving. The loom became both ancestor and model of machinery in general. It represented applied mechanics, predictable, repeatable, and scalable. By 1800, factories powered by water and later steam replaced domestic workshops. Human rhythm gave way to mechanical rhythm, measured not in breath, but in revolutions per minute. Chemistry followed mechanics. European dyers, competing with India's mastery of colour, began controlled experimentation. They analysed mordants, categorised pigments, and standardised recipes. Alum, copper, and iron salts were studied for their interaction with cellulose and protein fibres. The scientific method entered the dye house. By the century's end, chemistry had become indispensable to textiles, both for colour and for bleaching, scouring, and finishing. This shift from intuition to analysis marked the birth of textile science as a discipline. Clothing during this period reflected both wealth and technology. Cotton prints, silk brocades, and wool uniforms symbolised empire's reach. Each yard of fabric traced invisible routes of labour and exchange, from plantations to mills, from dye houses to tailors. The wearer stood at the centre of a global network woven from conquest and ingenuity. Fashion accelerated, its pace matching industrial capability. Seasonal trends emerged, sustained by machines that could deliver novelty on command. The once slow evolution of clothing had entered mechanical time. By the late 18th century, textiles had become the first fully mechanised industry. Their transformation drove the development of metallurgy, engineering, and urbanisation. Steam engines pumped water for mills, iron frames supported looms, chemical processes standardised colour. The humble thread, spun by hand for tens of thousands of years, now turned on machines that never slept. The science of clothing had crossed from art to industry, from rhythm to revolution. The age of empire was thus the age of textiles. Every empire was built not only on territory, but on fibre. Silk for diplomacy, wool for armies, cotton for commerce. The loom stood at the intersection of invention and exploitation, creation and control. The threads that once connected civilizations through exchange now bound them through dependence. The world was woven tighter than ever, into a single expanding fabric of trade, science and power. By the early 19th century, textiles had become the engine of industrialization. Factories filled the landscapes of Britain, Europe, and eventually North America, their clattering looms and spinning frames powered by water, coal, and steam. What had once been the quiet rhythm of a handcraft turned into the roar of machinery. The making of clothing had entered a new phase of science, systematic, mechanical, and global. Every spool of thread represented not hours of labour, but the integration of physics, chemistry, and engineering into daily life. The spinning and weaving processes were now continuous, no longer confined to household or guild. In Britain's textile districts, Manchester, Leeds, and Lancashire, mills rose in rows along canals, their architecture designed around efficiency and airflow. Inside, line shafts transmitted power from steam engines to hundreds of machines. The principle of centralized energy transformed production. One engine could drive thousands of spindles, each turning at precise, synchronized speed. This was the birth of industrial systems thinking. One source, many outputs, governed by mechanical regularity. Spinning technology advanced rapidly. Arkwright's water frame had already introduced mechanized twist, but the mule perfected it. Samuel Crompton's spinning mule allowed adjustment between strength and fineness, producing threads suitable for both warp and weft. Its success rested on understanding fibre behaviour, the balance of twist and tension required to prevent breakage. Mechanics became material scientists by necessity. They studied friction, elasticity, and humidity to optimize performance. Textile factories thus became laboratories where engineering principles were proven daily through production. Weaving followed the same trajectory. Edmund Cartwright's power loom, introduced in the 1780s, translated the actions of a weaver into mechanical sequence. Steam-powered looms multiplied output far beyond human capacity. By mid-century, thousands of looms clattered across England's north, each managed by attendants who monitored threads and shuttles. The process was relentless and precise. Textile production shifted from skilled craftsmanship to industrial supervision, from the intelligence of hands to the discipline of machines. This mechanization drove parallel advances in material science. Fibre behaviour under stress and heat became measurable phenomena. Engineers observed that humidity affected yarn tension, dry air caused breakage, damp air softened fibres. Mills began installing humidifiers, an early form of environmental control. Metallurgy improved machine durability, and lubricants reduced friction between moving parts. Every challenge in textile manufacture yielded a mechanical solution, and each solution influenced other industries. The loom's logic spread to printing presses, paper machines, and eventually computing. Chemistry deepened its role in textile production. The bleaching process, once relying on sunlight and lye, was replaced by chlorine discovered in the late 18th century by Carl Wilhelm Scheele and applied industrially by Claude Louis Berthollet. Chemical bleaching shortened days of exposure to hours, standardizing whiteness and cleanliness. In 1856, a further leap occurred when William Henry Perkin accidentally synthesized Mauveine, the first aniline dye. This discovery marked the birth of synthetic colour and industrial organic chemistry. Dyers could now produce shades unachievable with natural pigments, reproducible across batches and seasons. Colour became chemistry made visible. Global trade in textiles intensified. Cotton grown in the American South supplied British mills, linking industrial Europe to plantation economies sustained by enslaved labour. Ships crossed the Atlantic carrying raw bales one way and finished cloth the other. The triangular trade tied mechanical innovation to human suffering. The same systems that optimized output in factories also optimized exploitation. Behind every bale of fabric lay data, cost, yield, and control, a pattern as precise as the woven threads themselves. The industrial city evolved around the mill. Entire communities formed near sources of power and transport. Housing, schools, and shops clustered beside factory walls. The soundscape of the era was mechanical. The hiss of steam, the thud of pistons, the ceaseless hum of looms. Workers adapted to machine time, shifts measured by bell rather than sunrise. The precision demanded by machinery reshaped human rhythm. Textile production became not just industry but discipline, enforcing order through motion. Clothing itself reflected these shifts. Machine-spun cotton made garments affordable to broader populations. Standardized cloth widths and thread counts allowed mass tailoring and uniformity. The first ready-made clothing appeared for soldiers and sailors, later extending to civilians. What had once been bespoke became accessible. Fabric ceased to be a marker of exclusivity and became a medium of industrial equality, though still shaped by economic hierarchy. The democratization of clothing paralleled the mechanization of its making. Scientific institutions began studying textiles formally. Laboratories analyzed fiber strength, elasticity, and absorption. Journals published findings on the mechanical properties of wool and cotton, linking practical manufacturing to theoretical physics. Universities collaborated with mills, marking the first intersection between academic research and industrial production. The science of clothing had matured into a discipline with measurable parameters and predictable results. Fiber length, twist per inch, and tensile strength became units of progress. Inventions multiplied. The jacquard loom, introduced in 1804 by Joseph Marie Jacquard, replaced manual pattern selection with punched cards. Each hole represented a binary choice, thread lifted or not, automating design through code. This system, adaptable to any pattern, made woven complexity routine. The logic of Jacquard's loom later inspired Charles Babbage's analytical engine and, a century later, the digital computer. In this lineage, the loom was not only an industrial device, but a conceptual bridge between material and information science. Steam power expanded reach, but electricity refined control. By the late 19th century, electric motors replaced central shafts, allowing independent machine operation. Production lines became modular, and output increased exponentially. Synthetic dyes diversified. Cellulose fibers like rayon appeared, and the study of polymers began. The once separate crafts of weaving, spinning, and dyeing merged into a single system, the textile industry, governed by mechanical, chemical, and electrical precision. Yet even amid this revolution, the thread itself remained unchanged in essence. Fiber still required twist. Fabric still demanded tension. The physical laws that governed the first Paleolithic cords continued to define the spinning frames of Manchester and Lowell. Industrialization did not replace nature but organized it. The science of clothing was an evolution of attention. From the observation of touch to the measurement of torque, from intuition to calculation. By 1900, the loom had transformed the world. It had driven empire, industry, and innovation. It had shaped the rhythm of labour and the structure of cities. Every movement of its shuttle traced the path of progress. From hand to machine, from motion to mechanism, humanity had woven itself into the age of industry, each revolution of the spindle marking a turn in history. The story of clothing was now the story of the modern world, patterned by invention, powered by science, and spun endlessly forward. As the 19th century progressed, textiles became a laboratory of chemistry. The Industrial Revolution had mechanized spinning and weaving, but colour remained a challenge. Natural dyes, madder, indigo, cochineal, were inconsistent, subject to fading, and often required laborious mordanting. Chemists sought reproducibility, stability, and vibrancy. Their work transformed clothing from practical covering into a medium of controlled colour, blending art, science, and industry. William Henry Perkins' accidental synthesis of mauve in 1856 exemplified this transformation. While attempting to create quinine, Perkin produced a purple pigment derived from coal tar. The dye could be applied consistently to silk, cotton, and wool, and it sparked the first wave of synthetic aniline dyes. Within decades, chemists produced reds, blues, greens, and yellows previously unobtainable. These colours were stable under light and washing, revolutionising the textile industry. Chemists were now integral to cloth production, bridging laboratory and factory. The development of synthetic dyes spurred further chemical innovation. Mordants were optimized for different fibers: alum for cotton, tin for wool, iron for silks. pH control, temperature regulation and timing became variables to manage. Factories installed dye houses with precise monitoring of these parameters, treating cloth as both material and chemical reaction. Textile science evolved into an applied chemistry discipline, with reproducible results replacing traditional empirical methods. Colour could now be designed, predicted, and scaled industrially. Textiles also advanced through fibre science. Natural fibres such as cotton, wool, silk and flax were analysed for tensile strength, absorbency and elasticity. Techniques to modify fibres chemically and physically emerged. Mercerization, developed by John Mercer in 1844, treated cotton with caustic soda to increase luster, tensile strength and dye affinity. Wool was carbonized to remove vegetable matter before dyeing. Silk underwent degumming to enhance smoothness. Each process was grounded in chemistry, improving both aesthetics and functionality. Synthetic fibres soon appeared. In the late 19th century, cellulose-based fibres such as rayon were invented, mimicking silk's sheen and flexibility. These artificial textiles relied on chemical manipulation of natural polymers. Early production was labour-intensive, requiring controlled exposure to solvents, coagulation baths, and drawing processes to align cellulose molecules. Rayon demonstrated that fibre could be designed at the molecular level, bridging biology, chemistry, and engineering. It marked the beginning of a new era in textile materials. Colour and chemistry also influenced fashion and society. Brighter, stable colours allowed for rapid shifts in style, accelerating the cycle of trends. Garments were no longer constrained by seasonal plant-based dyes. Synthetic colours enabled vivid uniforms, ceremonial robes, and consumer fashion. Clothing became a visible indicator of technological sophistication. Industrial colour management allowed mass production without loss of vibrancy, democratizing access to hues once reserved for royalty. Dye and fibre science required precise control of process parameters. Temperature, concentration, and agitation were measured and standardized. The laboratory became integral to textile factories. Chemists, engineers, and weavers collaborated to ensure reproducible quality. Cloth, once shaped entirely by human skill and environmental conditions, now emerged from predictable reactions. Scientific principles governed every aspect: absorption kinetics, fibre swelling, chemical affinity, and photostability. Textile chemistry also connected global supply chains. Indigo, now synthetically produced, reduced reliance on plantations in India and Africa. Coal tar dyes shifted industrial dependency from plants to minerals. Raw fibres were selected not only for availability, but for chemical compatibility with dyes and treatments. Fabric became a product of interconnected scientific knowledge, logistics, and material understanding. The making of clothing was no longer local alone. It was an orchestrated global enterprise guided by chemistry. Medical and functional textiles emerged from chemical innovation. Wool treated to resist pests, cotton sterilized for hospital use, silk for surgical sutures. Each application required precise understanding of fibre behaviour and chemical interactions. Fabrics were evaluated for tensile strength, absorbency, and biocompatibility. Clothing became not only a fashion statement, but a scientific tool. Chemistry extended the utility of textiles beyond aesthetic or protective functions into applied human health and safety. By the late 19th century, the combination of mechanics and chemistry had matured. Factories produced yarn and fabric at unprecedented scale. Dyes were reproducible and vibrant. Fibers could be modified for strength, luster, or comfort. Every aspect of clothing was quantifiable and controllable. The human role shifted from manual manipulation to system oversight, monitoring parameters and interpreting results. Textiles had become a medium in which industrial science, chemistry, and design converged. The industrial, chemical, and scientific revolutions in textiles set the stage for modern clothing. The science of fiber, dye, and process became inseparable from fashion, trade, and technology. Mechanization had provided scale. Chemistry provided control. Material understanding allowed design. Clothing was no longer merely protective or symbolic. It had become a product of deliberate scientific knowledge, linking human ingenuity to the properties of matter itself. The turn of the 20th century marked a decisive shift from artisanal craft to mass production in textiles and clothing. Mechanization had already transformed spinning, weaving, and dyeing. Now, sewing and garment assembly began the same evolution. Factories centralized labor, integrating mechanical tools, human skill, and chemical treatments into continuous production lines. The result was clothing produced faster, more uniformly, and in quantities previously unimaginable, democratizing access while redefining the economics of apparel. Sewing machines, developed and refined in the mid-19th century, became essential to this transformation. Isaac Singer's improvements in 1851 allowed machines to operate continuously with foot treadles and later electric motors, producing uniform stitches at speeds impossible by hand. Industrial workshops adopted multiple machines in parallel, organized in lines for efficiency. Garments were cut in bulk and sewn systematically, reducing waste and labor time. The sewing machine converted repetitive motion into consistent output, applying principles of mechanics to the construction of clothing itself. Pattern standardization emerged alongside mechanized sewing. Tailors and designers developed graded templates to produce garments in different sizes, creating the first ready-to-wear apparel. Measurement, once personalized and variable, became systematized. Textile dimensions, thread counts, and fabric elasticity were quantified to ensure uniformity across thousands of garments. Standardization required precise understanding of fiber behavior, tension, and shrinkage. Factories monitored humidity and temperature to maintain consistency, a practice rooted in industrial control of earlier spinning and weaving operations. The chemical advancements of the previous century enhanced mass production. Synthetic dyes ensured color uniformity across entire production batches, while finishes such as mercerization increased fabric strength and luster, making clothing more durable and appealing. Textile scientists measured absorbency, tensile strength, and elasticity to predict how fabric would behave during cutting, stitching, and daily wear. Production now required collaboration among chemists, engineers, and workers, an integrated approach blending multiple sciences into practical output. Global trade underpinned mechanized clothing production. Raw cotton from the American South, wool from Australia, and silk from China were imported in bulk to factories in Europe and North America. These fibers were processed into standardized thread and fabric, then assembled into garments for export or domestic sale. Supply chains became long, interconnected, and meticulously monitored. The economics of mass production depended on precise measurement, material optimization, and process control, laying the groundwork for modern industrial management. Mechanized production influenced style and fashion. Ready-to-wear clothing enabled rapid adoption of trends and seasonal changes. The velocity of fashion increased. Consumers could purchase garments that were previously the domain of the wealthy. Color coordination, patterns, and tailoring were standardized to suit multiple body types. Factories optimized material usage, cutting patterns to minimize waste while maximizing output. Mass production created a balance between creative design and industrial efficiency, merging aesthetics with scientific rigor. Labor structures adapted to these changes. Factories employed large teams of operators specializing in specific tasks: cutting, stitching, finishing, and quality control. The division of labor increased speed and precision. Supervisors monitored performance using quantitative measures, from thread tension to output per hour. Time motion studies, later formalized by Frederick Taylor, were first applied to textile operations, analyzing every motion to maximize efficiency. Clothing manufacture became a system of controlled operations, integrating human labor with mechanical and chemical processes. Advances in mechanized finishing complemented mass production. Fabrics underwent chemical treatments for shrink resistance, fire retardancy, and stain repellency. Steam pressing standardized folds and textures, producing consistent appearances in garments. Industrial dye baths ensured even color saturation across thousands of meters of fabric. Quality control became methodical. Inspections measured color fastness, seam strength, and dimensional accuracy. The industrial paradigm transformed clothing from craft into reproducible product, emphasizing measurement and control over individual skill. The industrialization of textiles also had social and economic implications. Mass-produced clothing provided affordable options to urban populations, reshaping consumer behavior. Garments became commodities in a global economy, traded across continents and marketed through department stores and catalogues. The science of textiles, mechanics, chemistry, and engineering underpinned not only production but accessibility. Fashion was now scalable, traceable, and quantifiable, a reflection of industrial capability as much as aesthetic preference. By the early 20th century, mechanization had matured into integrated systems. Spinning, weaving, dyeing, and garment assembly operated in coordinated sequences, combining human oversight with mechanical precision. The production of clothing had evolved from craft to science, from intuition to measurement, from local workshops to global factories. Every yard of fabric and every seam reflected centuries of technological, chemical, and mechanical knowledge. Clothing had become the product of systematic engineering, a tangible record of humanity's mastery over fiber, machinery, and material. The 20th century introduced a revolution in textiles through synthetic fibers. While cotton, wool, linen, and silk had dominated for millennia, the development of man-made materials expanded both the possibilities of clothing and the science behind it. Fibers such as rayon, nylon, polyester, and acrylic emerged, each engineered to meet specific functional, aesthetic, or economic needs. This period marked the fusion of chemistry, physics, and industrial design in ways previously unimaginable. Rayon, first commercially produced in the early 1900s, was derived from cellulose but processed chemically to mimic silk's luster and softness. Its creation required precise understanding of polymer chemistry and mechanical extrusion. Cellulose fibers were dissolved in chemical solutions and forced through spinnerets into coagulating baths, aligning molecules to form continuous threads. Early rayon manufacturing demonstrated how chemical manipulation could replicate and in some cases surpass natural materials. It was the first step toward designing fibers for purpose rather than necessity. Nylon, introduced by DuPont in 1939, exemplified the application of polymer science to clothing. Nylon was strong, elastic, and resistant to abrasion, ideal for stockings, parachutes, and outdoor gear. Its invention relied on detailed understanding of molecular structure, temperature control during polymerization, and spinning technology capable of producing uniform filaments. Nylon represented a fundamental shift. Fibers could now be synthesized from petrochemicals, engineered at the molecular level, and scaled for industrial production. Material science had become integral to fashion and function alike. Polyester followed in the 1950s, offering durability, wrinkle resistance, and dimensional stability. Its production combined condensation polymerization with continuous spinning, resulting in fibers that could be dyed uniformly and blended with natural fibers. Polyester's thermal properties allowed mechanical finishing such as heat setting, controlling shrinkage and texture. This capability introduced entirely new manufacturing efficiencies, enabling garments that retained shape and required minimal maintenance. Clothing became not only accessible but engineered for long-term performance. Synthetic fibers introduced new challenges and innovations in chemistry. Dyeing required different processes from natural fibers, as hydrophobic polymers resisted aqueous dyes. Chemists developed dispersed dyes and chemical auxiliaries to enhance color uptake. Finishing techniques evolved. Anti-static treatments, flame retardants, and water repellents became standard. Each advancement depended on detailed knowledge of fiber chemistry, molecular interaction, and surface physics. The modern textile factory became both a production facility and an applied laboratory. Blending natural and synthetic fibers further expanded design possibilities. Cotton-polyester blends combined comfort and durability. Wool-acrylic mixtures balanced warmth and ease of care. Engineers studied fiber ratios, tensile properties, and thermal behavior to optimize performance. Garments could now be tailored not only for appearance, but for function. Stretch, breathability, moisture wicking, and resistance to wear. Science allowed clothing to meet both practical and aesthetic criteria simultaneously. The production of synthetic fibers required precise control of machinery. Extrusion, spinning, and drawing had to maintain uniform diameter and molecular alignment. Environmental conditions, temperature, humidity, and solvent composition affected fiber properties. Process engineers monitored these variables rigorously, integrating instrumentation and feedback loops to ensure consistency. The textile line became a system of measurement and control, where every parameter influenced the final product. The scientific method was embedded in production. Synthetic fibers also accelerated globalization of the textile industry. Petrochemical feedstocks originated from oil-producing regions, while spinning and weaving facilities were located in industrial centers across Europe, North America, and Asia. Finished garments were distributed worldwide. The combination of chemistry and industrial logistics allowed for rapid production and mass market reach. The science of clothing now encompassed not only material properties, but also systems of distribution and supply. Fashion and function converged in synthetic textiles. Sportswear, outerwear, and technical garments benefited from engineered fibers. Moisture-wicking fabrics, insulating layers, and protective clothing all relied on material properties tuned through molecular design. Functionality became a design parameter alongside color and pattern, reflecting a broader understanding of human interaction with clothing. Clothing had evolved into engineered material, a product of scientific foresight as much as creative expression. By the late 20th century, the textile landscape had transformed. The mechanical precision of industrial looms, the chemical mastery of dyes, and the molecular engineering of synthetic fibers combined to produce garments unimaginable in prior centuries. Clothing had become a synthesis of chemistry, physics, and engineering, a tangible record of human ingenuity. The evolution from hand-spun fibre to polymer filament illustrates a consistent principle. Mastery over materials, energy, and process defines the science of clothing. Humanity had learned to design not only fabric, but also the conditions of its creation, completing a continuum from nature to engineered textile. The late 20th and early 21st centuries brought a new dimension to textiles: performance and functionality. Beyond aesthetics and durability, clothing began to serve specialized roles in health, safety, and extreme environments. Advances in materials science, engineering, and chemistry allowed designers to create fabrics with properties tuned to specific needs. Moisture wicking, thermal insulation, flame retardancy, antimicrobial activity, and stretch control became measurable features, transforming clothing into engineered systems. Moisture management was among the first functional innovations. Synthetic fibers such as polyester and polypropylene were engineered to transport sweat away from the skin through capillary action. By controlling fiber cross-section, surface tension, and hydrophilicity, engineers optimized evaporation and cooling. These principles were applied to athletic apparel, military uniforms, and outdoor gear. Scientific understanding of thermoregulation, sweat production, and heat transfer was directly translated into textile design, creating garments that enhanced human performance. Thermal regulation expanded textile capability further. Fabrics combining natural and synthetic fibers created insulating layers that trapped air while remaining lightweight. Advanced weaves and fiber crimps increased loft, while hollow-core synthetic filaments reduced weight and improved thermal efficiency. Research into thermal conductivity, emissivity, and moisture retention informed the selection of fibers and construction methods. Clothing became a controlled microenvironment, responsive to body temperature and external conditions, demonstrating the integration of physics with material design. Protective textiles evolved for industrial, military, and emergency applications. Flame-retardant fibers, initially developed from chemically treated natural fibers, later included inherently resistant synthetic polymers such as aramids. Kevlar, introduced in the 1960s, provided high-strength, heat-resistant fibers suitable for body armor and industrial gloves. Chemical and biological protection textiles incorporated coatings and layered constructions designed to resist permeation. Designing such fabrics required precise knowledge of polymer chemistry, fiber mechanics, and hazard exposure scenarios. Clothing became active protection rather than passive covering. Antimicrobial and hygienic textiles emerged from chemical and biotechnological innovations. Silver, copper, and chitosan compounds were embedded into fibers to inhibit microbial growth, while moisture control minimized conditions for bacterial proliferation. Hospitals, sportswear, and consumer garments benefited from these properties, blending textile science with microbiology. Functional clothing now combined chemical, physical, and biological considerations into a single engineered product. Stretch, elasticity, and shape retention became critical in activewear and medical textiles. Fibers such as spandex and elastane were developed to provide high elongation with return-to-shape characteristics. Fabric construction integrated these fibers with mechanical tensioning, stitch design, and fiber alignment. Testing measured elongation, tensile strength, and fatigue resistance, allowing garments to maintain performance over repeated use. The interplay between mechanical engineering and polymer science optimized clothing for both comfort and durability. Textile finishing and coatings further extended functionality. Waterproof membranes, breathable laminates, and reflective surfaces were added through chemical processes. Microencapsulation introduced slow-release compounds into fibers, enabling controlled delivery of fragrances, UV protection, or medication. Coatings relied on molecular adhesion, surface energy manipulation, and durability testing to ensure performance. Each advancement represented the precise application of chemistry, physics, and materials science to textiles. Digital technology began to integrate with clothing. Smart textiles incorporated conductive fibers, sensors, and communication modules, enabling garments to monitor vital signs, detect environmental hazards, or interact with electronics. Weaving, knitting, and embroidery were adapted to embed circuitry without compromising flexibility or comfort. These garments represented the convergence of traditional textile science with electronics, mechanical engineering, and software. Clothing became a platform for data collection and human-machine interface. Sustainability emerged as a scientific and industrial focus. Recycled fibers, biodegradable polymers, and low-impact dyeing processes were developed to reduce environmental footprint. Material analysis measured life cycle, degradation, and chemical leaching. Fabric selection considered both performance and ecological impact, integrating chemistry, engineering, and environmental science. Functional textiles now included responsibility as a design parameter, balancing human needs with planetary constraints. Through these innovations, clothing evolved from protective cover to engineered system. Every fiber, weave, and finish was quantified, tested, and optimized for purpose. Functionality became measurable, repeatable, and scalable. The integration of chemistry, physics, biology, and electronics transformed garments into active participants in human activity. Textiles were no longer passive. They were instruments, technologies, and tools designed to interact precisely with the wearer and environment. By the 21st century, the science of clothing had become an interdisciplinary enterprise. Fiber chemistry, mechanical engineering, digital technology, and environmental science combined to produce garments that were durable, adaptable, and responsive. Each thread represented centuries of accumulated knowledge, from hand-spun cord to polymer filament to sensor-integrated fiber. The evolution of textiles demonstrates that clothing is not only cultural and aesthetic, but also a continuously advancing field of applied science and engineering, linking human ingenuity to material reality. The modern textile and clothing industry operates on a scale that is unprecedented in history. Globalization has connected production, distribution, and consumption across continents, creating complex supply chains that integrate agriculture, chemistry, engineering, and logistics. Cotton grown in one hemisphere, polyester manufactured in another, and finished garments sold in markets worldwide exemplify how clothing has become a system of coordinated, industrial, scientific, and economic processes. Raw materials remain the foundation. Cotton, wool, silk, and synthetic polymers originate in geographically specialized regions. Cotton thrives in the southern United States, India, and Brazil. Wool in Australia, New Zealand, and Europe. Silk in China and Southeast Asia, and synthetic fibers from petrochemical feedstocks in industrialized regions. Each source is managed for consistency in fiber length, strength, and purity, reflecting centuries of knowledge about cultivation, breeding, and chemical processing. Material science extends from natural selection to molecular engineering. Spinning and weaving have been standardized and scaled globally. High-capacity mills in Asia produce thread and fabric at speeds and volumes unmatched in history. Automated looms, spinning machines, and finishing equipment operate continuously, often coordinated through digital systems that monitor tension, temperature, and output. Quality control integrates optical scanning, chemical analysis, and mechanical testing. This coordination of science and engineering ensures that fabrics meet specific requirements for strength, elasticity, texture, and color before leaving the mill. Garment manufacturing integrates cutting-edge technology with human labor. Computerized cutting machines optimize material use, minimizing waste and ensuring pattern precision. Sewing lines combine mechanization with specialized operators for complex assembly, while robotic assistance is emerging for repetitive or high-precision tasks. Production planning employs software that balances labor availability, machine capacity, and delivery schedules. The modern factory is a microcosm of systems engineering, materials, energy, and human oversight orchestrated for maximal efficiency. Logistics and distribution are central to the global textile system. Containers, ports, and transportation networks ensure that raw materials, fabrics, and finished garments move efficiently across continents. Supply chain management relies on real-time data, predictive modeling, and quality assurance to prevent delays or inconsistencies. This coordination depends on understanding material sensitivities, for example, controlling humidity to prevent fiber degradation or color migration. The science of clothing now extends beyond the factory to the flow of goods worldwide. Sustainability and ethics have become integral considerations. Chemical treatments, water usage, energy consumption, and labor practices are monitored and optimized to meet environmental and social standards. Recycled fibers, biodegradable synthetics, and low-impact dyes reduce ecological footprint. Life cycle assessments quantify energy and resource consumption from raw material to disposal. Environmental science, industrial engineering, and materials chemistry converge to produce textiles that are not only functional but responsible. Technology further enhances traceability and customization. Barcodes, RFID chips, and blockchain systems track fabrics from source to sale, ensuring transparency in provenance and quality. Custom garments can be produced rapidly through digital patterning and automated cutting, integrating consumer choice with industrial efficiency. Data science now informs fashion trends, inventory management, and material selection, linking scientific analysis to commercial decision-making. Clothing production has become a feedback-driven system informed by both human behavior and empirical measurement. The globalization of textiles also affects innovation. Collaboration across borders enables rapid adoption of new fibers, dyes, and mechanical processes. Research into high-performance materials, antimicrobial finishes, and functional garments occurs in multinational laboratories and shared academic industry partnerships. Knowledge transfer ensures that innovations in one region can be scaled and applied globally. The science of clothing has thus become not only practical but collaborative, linking disciplines and continents in a single chain of expertise. Consumer expectations shape production. Demand for fast fashion, technical wear, or sustainable clothing drives continuous adjustments in manufacturing, fiber development, and logistics. Materials must be adaptable, dyes reproducible, and garments consistent across production runs. The challenge of meeting diverse needs in multiple markets stimulates innovation in fiber engineering, mechanical design, and chemical processes. Modern clothing embodies precision, predictability, and responsiveness on a global scale. By the early 21st century, the making of clothing has evolved into a system as complex and interconnected as any industrial network. Each garment reflects not only cultural preferences, but the cumulative knowledge of fiber science, mechanical engineering, chemistry, logistics, and environmental management. The global supply chain represents centuries of incremental innovation, from hand-spun thread to synthetic filaments, mechanized looms, chemical processing, and digital integration. Clothing is no longer merely a product, it is a testament to human ingenuity applied across space, discipline, and scale. As the 21st century progresses, the textile industry has increasingly focused on sustainability and technological innovation. Environmental concerns, resource scarcity, and the impact of mass production have led to research in low-impact fibers, energy-efficient processes, and waste reduction. Modern textiles integrate chemistry, material science, and engineering not only to improve performance, but to minimize ecological footprint. This dual focus, functionality and responsibility, defines the contemporary science of clothing. Recycled fibers have become a major area of development. Post-consumer cotton, polyester, and nylon are mechanically or chemically processed to produce new threads. Mechanical recycling involves shredding fabrics into fiber, which can then be spun into yarn, though fiber length and strength may decrease. Chemical recycling breaks polymers down to monomers, allowing reconstruction into fibers with properties equivalent to virgin material. These processes require precise control of temperature, solvents, and chemical reactions to ensure consistency. Modern textile science thus incorporates both recovery and transformation, closing the loop on material use. Water and energy efficiency are central to sustainable dyeing and finishing. Traditional dyeing consumes large volumes of water and energy, but innovations such as supercritical CO2 dyeing, foam dyeing, and low liquor ratio processes reduce resource usage dramatically. Chemists and engineers monitor pressure, temperature, and chemical concentration to achieve uniform color while minimizing waste. Energy-efficient machines and renewable power sources further reduce the carbon footprint of textile production. Sustainable textiles therefore combine material, chemical, and mechanical science with environmental stewardship. Smart textiles and wearable technology represent a parallel axis of innovation. Conductive fibers, flexible circuits, and embedded sensors allow clothing to monitor vital signs, respond to temperature changes, or communicate digitally. Fiber composition, weave structure, and insulation properties must be engineered precisely to maintain comfort, flexibility, and safety. Integrating electronics with traditional textiles requires interdisciplinary understanding of polymer chemistry, mechanical stress, electrical conductivity, and human ergonomics. Garments become dynamic systems capable of responding to both wearer and environment. Functional coatings and treatments continue to expand garment capability. Waterproof, UV-resistant, flame-retardant, and antimicrobial finishes are applied using chemical formulations engineered for durability and compatibility with specific fibers. Microencapsulation allows slow release of active compounds such as fragrances, vitamins, or insect repellents. Each treatment requires understanding of surface chemistry, diffusion, and fiber interactions to ensure effectiveness over repeated use. Modern clothing blends aesthetic design with measurable, functional performance at the molecular level. Digital fabrication techniques have transformed production. 3D knitting, laser cutting, and automated embroidery enable complex patterns and customized fit with minimal material waste. CAD systems allow precise planning of stitch density, tension, and fiber orientation. These methods extend mechanical principles developed in industrial looms into new programmable environments. The integration of digital precision and material science permits garments to be designed and produced with unprecedented accuracy and flexibility. Circular economy principles are increasingly applied to textiles. Materials are designed for recyclability, biodegradability, and longevity. Biopolymers derived from plants or microbial fermentation offer alternatives to petrochemical-based fibers. Closed-loop production systems monitor fiber recovery, chemical recycling, and energy consumption. Process engineering, polymer science, and environmental chemistry converge to create textiles that are functional, sustainable, and adaptable. The science of clothing now integrates both product performance and ecological responsibility. Global collaboration accelerates innovation. Researchers, engineers, and designers share advances in synthetic fibers, sustainable dye chemistry, and smart textiles across borders. Industry academic partnerships foster rapid translation of laboratory discoveries into commercial applications. Testing laboratories analyze fiber strength, moisture transport, thermal performance, and chemical durability to meet international standards. This interconnected ecosystem ensures that innovation in textiles continues to advance at a rapid pace. Consumer expectations drive technological application. Demand for performance, comfort, and sustainability guides fiber selection, garment construction, and finishing methods. Analytical techniques measure shrinkage, pilling, color fastness, and breathability. Advanced testing enables garments to perform in extreme climates, athletic conditions, or industrial environments. The combination of empirical measurement and engineering design ensures that modern clothing meets both functional and ethical requirements. Through these advancements, textiles have evolved into a highly engineered system. Fibers, dyes, and finishes are designed for precise performance, integrated into complex supply chains, and optimized for minimal environmental impact. The science of clothing encompasses chemistry, material science, engineering, and environmental stewardship, demonstrating the convergence of centuries of innovation. Modern garments embody a synthesis of performance, sustainability, and technological sophistication, reflecting the cumulative mastery of human ingenuity over fiber, form, and function. The trajectory of clothing continues into an era defined by integration, intelligence, and sustainability. Future textiles are envisioned not simply as passive coverings, but as active systems interacting with the wearer and environment. Material science, electronics, chemistry, and mechanical engineering converge to create garments capable of monitoring health, regulating temperature, adapting shape, and even generating energy. Clothing becomes a platform for both protection and augmentation, extending the human experience while reflecting centuries of accumulated knowledge. Smart textiles are evolving from embedded sensors to fully interactive fabrics. Conductive fibers, microelectronics, and responsive polymers allow garments to measure heart rate, respiration, and temperature, providing real-time feedback for athletic, medical, and occupational applications. Thermochromic or photochromic materials enable fabrics to change color or opacity in response to light and temperature. Shape memory fibers adjust tension and structure automatically. These innovations depend on precise molecular engineering, advanced fabrication methods, and data-driven design, transforming clothing into dynamic, responsive systems. Sustainability continues to guide material innovation. Bioengineered fibers derived from proteins, cellulose, or microbial synthesis offer alternatives to conventional synthetics. They can be designed for biodegradability, tensile strength, and functional properties such as moisture management or antimicrobial activity. Recycling systems are increasingly sophisticated, converting post-consumer garments into reusable fibers or chemical feedstocks. Life cycle analysis informs design choices, integrating environmental impact into every stage of textile production. The science of clothing is now inseparable from ecological stewardship. Artificial intelligence and digital manufacturing reshape how clothing is designed and produced. Computational models predict how fibers interact, how fabrics drape, and how garments perform under stress. 3D printing and automated knitting enable customization at scale, reducing waste and increasing precision. Virtual fitting technologies optimize patterning and fit without physical prototypes. Digital systems link global supply chains, tracking materials and production for efficiency and sustainability. Technology allows clothing to become both personalized and scientifically optimized. Functional clothing is expanding into extreme environments. Garments for space exploration, deep-sea diving, and high-altitude conditions integrate insulation, pressure regulation, chemical resistance, and environmental sensing. Advanced composites and layered textiles protect the human body while minimizing weight and maximizing mobility. Each garment requires interdisciplinary design, combining aerodynamics, thermodynamics, materials science, and human physiology. Clothing is no longer simply protective, it is engineered life support. Medical and therapeutic textiles are advancing rapidly. Fabrics embedded with drug delivery systems, monitoring sensors, or electrostimulation elements allow continuous care outside traditional clinical settings. Stretch, compression, and fiber alignment are precisely controlled to support circulation, mobility, and musculoskeletal health. Chemistry, materials engineering, and biomechanics converge to produce garments that are simultaneously clothing and medical device. The role of textiles in human health is becoming as central as their historical role in warmth and protection. The cultural and aesthetic dimensions of clothing remain, but they are increasingly informed by science. Designers can manipulate fiber properties, weave structures, and dye chemistry to create textures, colors, and patterns previously impossible. Computational tools enable visualization of optical effects, texture, and movement before production. Clothing thus becomes a fusion of artistry and engineering, guided by principles of light, tension, and material behavior. Scientific understanding expands creative potential. Global supply chains continue to optimize resource use and efficiency. Blockchain and digital tracking enhance transparency, ensuring ethical sourcing and compliance with environmental standards. Automation in cutting, sewing, and finishing allows rapid scaling while reducing waste. Supply chain design incorporates energy efficiency, chemical management, and recycling pathways, reflecting an integration of logistics with textile science. The making of clothing is now a complex, traceable system spanning continents and disciplines. Education and research are central to this future. Universities and industry collaborate on fiber chemistry, textile engineering, and sustainable production. Laboratories measure mechanical, chemical, thermal, and optical properties of fibers and fabrics, creating data that informs design, production, and innovation. The cumulative knowledge from millennia of fiber manipulation guides contemporary experimentation. Science ensures that future clothing is not only functional and sustainable, but also reliable, predictable, and efficient. Looking forward, clothing will continue to evolve as a synthesis of tradition and innovation. Fibers, dyes, mechanical systems, and digital technologies combine to produce garments that protect, enhance, and adapt. Sustainability and ethics are increasingly embedded in design, while performance and personalization expand human capability. The history of clothing, from prehistoric cords to smart fabrics, demonstrates that every advancement builds on prior knowledge, blending observation, experimentation, and engineering. Humanity's mastery of fibers and textiles continues, shaping the future of how we cover, protect, and interact with our world.